He is going to speak with us today about the Cold War and the atomic bomb. So I'll let him kind of reintroduce himself and get going. Guys, pay attention, take some notes, write down the important things, and enjoy it. It's going to be fun. He talks about some really neat stuff.
All right. We have the time period after World War II. Remember, World War II was the most significant event in the history of the world. How many years ago was that? Ended in 1945, so what was that date? How many years ago? 70, right? That's right. So it's not that long ago. If you really think about it in the whole time frame of the world. Okay, so what happened after World War II? Remember Germany? It's right here. In World War II, y'all remember Germany? They conquered all this area right here. Remember that?
Yes.
And then, but Russia kept coming, and Russia on this side attacked them. America and England on this side attacked them. And eventually, Germany was defeated. Everybody was so scared of Germany that you know what? We're going to divide up Germany. We don't trust them. You know, they were responsible for portions of World War I where you had 40 million people die. We're responsible for World War II. You had 80 million people die. So we're just going to chop them up. So we're going to say, okay, this side is going to be eastern part of Germany. That's western part of Germany. Russia, the Soviet Union, remember they were communist. Do you remember what communism was? That's right. Yes. Yep.
Instead of competing for money, everyone shares.
Right. So right now, do we have a communist system in America? No, we don't. So in America, if you want to work real hard, you get paid more money. And if you're really good at your work, you get paid a lot of money. In communism, you don't have that at all. You work the same, you get paid the same, and that's it. You don't have much innovation. But if you remember, communism arose because you had very, very rich people, and you had very, very poor people. And the poor people, no matter how hard they worked, they didn't get paid hard anything. The rich people didn't work at all, and they got all the money. And the poor people rose up and said, "To heck with that, let's kick them out of their houses. We'll live in their houses so we don't freeze to death, like in Russia, and everybody's equal." So if you're way down here very poor, you want to be equal like everyone else. Well, if you have any money, any property, any housing, in communism, you lose all that. So if you're wealthy, you don't want to be equal with all the poor people. So all the wealthy people said, "Hey, we don't want to lose all our money in our bank accounts, all our houses and cars and stuff like that. We don't like communism." And the communists over here said, "Hey, that's not fair. You're keeping the poor people down, and you're making yourselves rich." So that's just how the world divided up. The communists said everybody should be equal, and the democracies over here said that's not fair, and the world was divided. So when Russia attacked Germany, these are all the countries that the Russian armies went through to push back Germany. And America and England pushed Germany back this way, and they kind of met right in the middle, and that's how the world was divided up. These countries all were under the communist or Soviet form of government, and these countries were not. It's complicated. But this Cold War lasted from the end of World War II for 40 years. And this was your parents and your grandparents certainly remember a lot about the Cold War. What's the capital of Germany? Berlin. That's right, Berlin. You remember how Germany was divided between the communists and the non-communists? Well, Berlin, the capital, was also divided. So you had, right here is Berlin, right in the middle of East Germany. And even that was divided up. So the communists in red, they said, "You know what, we're not going to let any food come in here to Berlin because we want them to turn communist too." And a lot of people said, "Well, let's have our tanks go in there and bring food into Berlin." And the communists said, "Well, if you do that, we're going to fight back." And we're about to have a huge war right after World War II with America and all these countries here fighting the communists. And finally people said, you know, there's got to be a smarter way to do this instead of just sending a bunch of tanks in after World War III. And they said, we're just going to fly the planes over. And they flew right over. They flew from here into Berlin and brought a bunch of food. It's called the Berlin Airlift. And it kept us from having another war. So in America, you had factories. Instead of pumping out tanks and ships, artillery, the women who were in those factories making this, they went back into the houses. And men came in the factories, and they started. So they just, it's a big switch. So the men are in the factories, women are at home, living in houses like this. All of a sudden, you had all these 20 million soldiers coming back, and they had to find places to live, and their families were starting to get big, and they started putting up houses all looking all the same. Look at all that. They just chuck a whole bunch of houses down there, rip out all the trees, and that's where they lived. A lot on the East Coast, it's called Levittown, and they just had houses after houses after houses, and that's where they all fit in.
There's a Google Maps of this area.
Yeah, that's right. This is a lot more dense. The population density is just outrageous. And what they also had done is that when the soldiers came back, they had what's called the GI Bill. What does that do, the GI Bill? It's real simple. When you come back, you can either go work in the factories, or you can go to college, and the government pays for it. Thank you for helping us in the war. Soldiers, now you can go into college. And a lot of them became scientists and stuff like that. It was very important to the progress of the United States. It was have all these guys go into college, and then they come out much more educated. And that's how our economy got very strong. What is this? It's a B-17 bomber. It's an American bomber. So in World War II, these airplanes dropped a bunch of bombs on Japan and Germany to stop them from fighting us in World War II. These are the bombs dropping, and they dropped a lot of bombs. My mother was who they were dropping the bombs on. She was living in Germany, and she survived. She lived in a city like Dresden, but she survived 86 bombing raids. So Dresden, after 1,000 American bombers in one bombing raid, 1,000 bombers turned this into that. And she barely escaped, too. She was in 86 of these bombing raids. So what did Germany do after the war was over? Did they rebuild the cities exactly like they found them? No, because there's a lot of slums. There's a lot of really poor housing, a lot of just really bad building. And so they didn't rebuild slums. They rebuilt fancy, new, shiny cities and factories, because all the factories were bombed. Same with Japan. You don't rebuild slums. You rebuild very nice places. So all of a sudden, Japan and Germany, their economies are booming because everything is made fresh again. So after World War II, do you remember during World War II, the V-2 rockets Germany had? Those new weapons that they had? Well, the guy that helped create some of the V-2 rockets was Werner von Braun. He was German. Well, America said, we're having problems with our rockets getting off the ground. Let's get this guy. And they went into Germany and grabbed him right before the Russians grabbed him, because Russians wanted to do the same thing too. They couldn't get their rockets off the ground. So we grabbed him and brought him to America. Remember, he built these for the Germans. He's now building these for the Americans. And that's how we were able to get our rockets off the ground, because he knew how to do it. We had to steal them before the Russians stole them. So the atomic bomb, the A-bomb. Yes, they created the A-bomb. They really didn't know what they were making. They never made anything like that before. They dropped some in New Mexico, but this is the hydrogen bomb. Because everybody wants to make a bigger bomb, so they can scare the Russians, remember? Because the Russians had also stolen some German scientists, and they had the atomic bomb too. So we said, well, they got the atomic bomb. We have to have a bigger bomb, because we want to scare them so they don't fight us. Of course, they're thinking the same thing too. They want to have a bigger bomb so we don't attack them. So the Americans developed the hydrogen bomb. The hydrogen bomb was so scary, it used an atomic bomb as a trigger to make a hydrogen bomb go off. So here we have a whole bunch of ships here, and the ships, they don't have any people on them. They have goats and birds and things like that because they were to test how powerful the hydrogen bomb was in radioactivity. But when they exploded this, look at this ship.
You can partially see another one somewhere.
Yeah, that ship's going straight up. They really didn't know what the hydrogen bomb was going to do. Some people said it's going to ignite the atmosphere. The whole planet blow up. So when the hydrogen bomb blew up, it got big. And it really got big. All those ships all melted. And it kept getting bigger and bigger. And finally it stopped. But they said, wow. So the bomb that was dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those bombs were about 600 kilotons.
7th grade students at this time may be dismissed to their benchmark groups. 7th grade students at this time may be released to their benchmark groups. Teachers, per the schedule for Tuesday, April 14th, at 8:30, we will begin with the student demographic information, stopping at the middle of page 26. I'll get back on at 8:30 for an announcement. Thank you.
So about 600 kilotons, that was the yield, as they say, the size of the atomic bombs dropped in Japan. So what's bigger, a kiloton or a megaton? Yeah, a kilobyte and a megabyte, right? Well, this was 6 megatons. So that's big. Well, the Russians said, well, you know, you got that, we'll make a bigger one. So they made one that was 10 megatons. The Americans said, we'll make one that's 12 megatons, and then 13 megatons. The Russians finally made the biggest one ever, 58 megatons. And when they dropped it, they called it the Tsar. It was this big. When they dropped it, the Earth actually changed axis, the rotation on the axis for a bit. It was that powerful. How many of y'all been in an airplane, really high up in an airplane? Okay? So picture looking out your window, see something like that in the distance. Yeah, that's 50 megatons right there. That's right. Now that is an explosion. So picture this being dropped on a city. This would terrify everybody in the communist world and in the United States and the countries over here. We figured out, we just realized that we don't want these things dropped on our cities. And we were going to do whatever we can not to have these dropped in our cities. And I remember as a kid, and I'm sure most likely your grandparents, did something called duck and cover. Ever heard of that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, duck and cover, that's crazy. It says, well, okay, kids, if you see a big flash in the light, you duck under your desk and you'll be protected. Protected, you've been melted too. You know, really, if something like this, actually, if the hydrogen bomb was dropped in New York City, I'll be wiped out. If one of these here was dropped in Fayetteville, this whole area would be sand. Okay, so going to, who knows what country this is? China. Very good. Who's this guy right here? Chairman Mao. Very good. Okay, so China had a lot of work. I mean, a lot of work. And Chairman Mao able to get them to rise up against the rich folks, and communism took over China. Here's a harder one. What country is this?
Korea?
Korea. Very good. Korea. Korea turned communist also. And you've got the Korean War, which is another segment we'll discuss, but the Korean War is part of the Cold War. North Korea and South Korea were divided. They used to be part of Japan, but after World War II, Japan lost this and it became North Korea and South Korea. South Korea wanted to be like us, a democracy. North Korea became communist. China turned communist. Russia was already communist. North Korea says, you know what? They're just gonna attack these guys. And they did, they attacked them. And so we helped out South Korea, the rest of the Chinese helped out North Korea. And it became a tie after many years and a lot of fighting. But that's what the Cold War cost a couple million people's lives. Same in Vietnam. You had the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese went to war, and there was a couple million people lost their lives there as well. Okay, Khrushchev, the leader of Russia, and who's this guy?
Fidel.
Cuba, Castro. Now this is a hard one. Who knows this guy? Guarantee your grandparents know who he is. His name is Joe McCarthy. He was a senator from Wisconsin. And he decided he was going to make a name for himself, and he says, he went to newspaper reporters, there are 210 communists in the State Department. The State Department is part of our government. And the newspaper says, how many? 234. Another reporter says, how many? 186. And he kept changing his number. So instead of the newspaper headline saying, are there communists in the State Department? The question was, how many communists run the State Department? You see how tricky he was? Instead of giving one number, and then they start questioning him if they're communists in the State Department, he gave a bunch of different numbers, and they start saying, well, how many are in there? Very clever. And he was on the committee that Congress formed to search for communists in our government. And it was called the House Un-American Activities Committee. We were so scared that communists were going to take over America, we wanted to find out if they're already in our government and trying to take over. And this is the committee. And they sit people right here in the chair, and they make them put their hand up, and they say, are you a communist? And if they say yes, then they can't get a job anywhere, because everybody's so scared of communists. And if they say no, they say, okay, you're out of here. But if the guy says, you know what, it's none of your business. This is a freedom of speech. You can be a member of any party you want in America. And they say, we'll just throw you in jail. If you're not going to tell us who the other people are that are communists that you know, we'll throw you in jail until you tell us. And that's what they did. He was on the cover of Time magazine, Joe McCarthy. Who's this? He was brought in by Joe McCarthy to testify before the committee, and they asked him, tell us about all the communists you know. That's Disney. That's Walt Disney.
What?
That's Walt Disney. They brought him in. Tell us about all the communists you know. Isn't that crazy? They brought in Disney. These are some of the people on the committee here. This is actually future President Richard Nixon. Who's this? It's Ronald Reagan. He became president. He was brought before the committee. Tell us about all the communists you know about. They brought everybody in. Who's this person? Baseball? Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson. Finally, they went a little too far with the committee, and they brought in all the Hollywood people. And these Hollywood people said, this Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, all the famous Hollywood people, as you know, enough is enough. And they protested. And eventually, McCarthy drank himself too much and went too far and said there was a bunch of communists in our own military. And the military says, we're not going to put up with that, and they chased him out. And he left the U.S. Senate, and he died just a couple years later. Okay, so communism has this whole area right here. It's all right here. Communism is starting to pop up here, but down here, and America is really scared. There's Korean War, the Vietnam War. America and all these countries here are very scared communism is going to take over the world. Mohammad Mossadegh, the Prime Minister of Iran. He was elected by the people. We had an oil company, us and the British, in Iran called Aramco. And we took a lot of oil out of Iran and didn't pay tax on it. We had the companies there, we're just pumping out oil. And he said, you know, that's not fair, that's our oil. you need to pay a little bit of tax on that so we can kind of fund some of our schools. Well, Aramco went to our CIA. What is the CIA?
Central Intelligence.
Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA was created after World War II to be our spies. And our spies would go all over the world, look for people that are trying to cause problems for the U.S. and deal with them. So this guy here was telling one of our companies that they need to pay some tax on the oil they're taking out. The company went to the CIA, and the CIA, what happened? Got rid of them. Another leader of a foreign country. We got rid of them. Guatemala? Who knows anything about Guatemala? Country in Central America. He was the president of Guatemala. He was a teacher, and he became president. And there was a company called U.S. Fruit Company, and they took a bunch of fruit out of Guatemala. They owned the land, and they took all the fruit out. He was like, "That's not fair. You're taking all our fruit. You own all our land. You need to pay some money," because he was a teacher, to help fund some of our schools. Well, the U.S. Fruit Company went to the CIA, and what happened to him?
We got rid of him.
Yeah, we got rid of him too. This actually is the memo. Newly released from the committee, it's called the Church Committee, which was in 1975, investigated CIA. Our own Congress investigated CIA and discovered all these little memos saying, hey, we're going to go and take out CIA's role in the overthrow of HAR-BERs. And it discusses how we got rid of them. So we need 260 men through Honduras and El Salvador to go in there. It's amazing. Patrice Lumumba in Africa. We were very concerned Africa was going to turn communist. And we were concerned, so what happened to him? Our CIA got rid of him, and the communists came in, and they put in their own dictator, because we couldn't get a guy in fast enough. And the dictator's name was Mobutu. He was dictator for a long time. And that's not to say that the communists were good guys either. You know, we were very concerned some of these countries would turn communist, so we would want to have our own person in there, but we made our person very strong and powerful. So the communists had dictators, communist dictators in Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, all these countries here. And they put the hurt on their people because they don't want democracy taken over. Erich Honecker, East Germany. Remember, Germany's divided? He was as bad a dictator as you would find on the communist side. And so they had something called the secret police, called the Stasi. I mean, Germany just went through World War II, and now they're going back to being dictators again. And
Excuse the interruption, it's 8:30, you may begin. Thank you.
so the East German secret police, the Stasi, they were bad news. They would, I remember when we would visit, as a kid, visit East Germany, we were followed. Everywhere we went, the secret police would follow us. From a hotel room to a restaurant, to visit friends, they follow us, they write on a piece of papers, and they'd stand like 15 feet from you, just write all the stuff down that you were doing, who you were visiting. And then after you visited them, Stasi would go and take the people we visited, take them to jail for a couple of weeks to see if they had any information about, you know, us wanting to overthrow East Germany. And so what East Germany would do is that they would go to people, wait a minute, I think that guy's going to be a spy, so let's go to his neighbors and give them money, and then the neighbors can give us information. They're called informers. You know what someone who informs is, an informer? Okay, well, they had so many informers that you had wives informing about their husbands, and husbands informing about their grandparents, and kids were being paid to inform on their parents. 1 out of every 4 people in Germany was being paid by the government to inform on other people. Crazy. Just think a government person coming to you and says, here's $100, we'll give you $100 a week if you tell us everything your parents are doing. That's what they're doing. The whole country was spying on itself. Crazy way to go through life. And when they would decide that they felt they weren't getting the truth, they'd take a whole classroom like y'all, they'd take you on and put you in jail and make you stand up with your hands over your head for 2 hours straight. Control your hands for 2 hours straight. And if you put your hand down, they beat you up. And that's what these terms would do. It was a dictatorship. In Czechoslovakia, it was also a dictatorship run by the communists, and these students rose up and they said, enough's enough. We're not going to allow this. We're going to throw out the communists. So 1968. We had a friend of ours, Eugen Sharp. If you remember in the World War II discussion, Eugen lived in a small town in Czechoslovakia, and an SS officer in World War II, remember, was riding through his town, and he was killed. So the Nazis lined up every single man and boy over the age of 14, lined them all up, and they shot every third one. He was number 2 in line. So Eugen was, I think, 13 or 14 at the time. He survived that. Well, he's now about 35, and he's a leader in Czechoslovakia against the communists. And so with all these students protesting, what do you think the communists did? Had a whole bunch of tanks coming. So our friend Eugen is giving a speech here, and these tanks come around the corner, and Eugen said a tank turned his can right at him and fired. And blew up this whole podium here. Eugen jumped off just in time so it didn't blow up. A whole bunch of other people blew up. And the tanks came in and started machine gunning everybody. That's what the communists are doing to their own people. Of course, some of the people wanted to fight back. But what do you do against a tank?
He's trying to go in.
With a hammer? Your fingernails? Well, sometimes what they would do is they get like a bottle of vodka, and they put some cloth through it. And light it. Exactly. So sometimes that would work. But you can't do that against 80,000 Soviet soldiers and 250 tanks. So they were crushed. This is Nikolai Ceausescu, one of the worst dictators ever. And they would just, anybody spoke up against, they just shoot them. Didn't they ask them a question? They shoot them, they shoot their whole family. So Ceausescu here, this is a fascinating picture. Ceausescu is actually standing up on a high balcony in front of a huge crowd of all these people that were put together that were in support of Ceausescu, because so many people Ceausescu was having to shoot that he felt that he needed to have a rally in support of him. So he's giving a speech, and all these people are cheering on, Ceausescu, you're great, you're just the best leader ever, and he's giving a speech, and right then the crowd decides to turn on him. And instead of cheering him, they're booing him, and they start attacking the palace. And this is the exact moment that he recognizes that cheering crowd is actually coming to get him. And they climb the walls. And there's videos of this on YouTube of Nikolai Ceausescu of Romania. And they climb the walls, and he and his wife jump on a helicopter as they're trying to jump on too, to pull them back down, to rip them to shreds. And they eventually catch him, and they shoot he and his wife. All right, so that was Romania. We talked about Czechoslovakia, East Germany. We talked about Iran right here with Mohammad Mossadegh. We talked about Mobutu in Congo. We talked about Guatemala here. We talked about the Vietnam War over here in Korea. The communism and democracy that's fighting back and forth, back and forth. And we're just trying to see who's going to take over the world. Central America didn't have that problem. Not Central America. South America did not have that problem. South America, you've got beautiful wide avenues, economies, thriving economies, not much violence. fantastic place to live down there. You have nice environment, growing cities. You had democracy down there. No concerns. Oh, looks like a decent place to live, right? Augusto Pinochet, the general, and President Allende. And Allende was elected by the people. Pinochet wanted his job. So Pinochet, what does he do? What do you think he does? It's kind of hard. Who does he call? He calls for CIA. He says, hey, this guy's back to the communists. Why don't you go blow him up? So we did. We blew him up and took over. This guy becomes dictator of Argentina. And all the people protesting, they all get them. All the students protesting, they, yeah. Heard of an extradition? It's a hard word. A lot of Nazis left Germany running away from justice, and they had to go hide someplace. You couldn't hide in many countries because those countries would turn them in to the international governing body that was looking for these Nazis. But in South America, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, they didn't do that. In Chile in particular, Chile right here, Chile didn't mind having the Nazis down there. And when Pinochet took over, this man took over, he got a hold of some of the Nazis that were hiding in Chile. Same thing happened in Argentina. And says, hey, I need you to build some prison camps, concentration camps. And they started putting their people in concentration camps in South America. A lot of students like this, they put them on big airplanes and said, we're going to make you leave the country, we're going to take you to the United States. And when they get them over the ocean, they chunk them out. And these are all the people looking for their loved ones who disappeared during this time period in Chile and in Argentina. So that was down here, Chile, Argentina, Paraguay. So in the 60s, we talked about Castro in Cuba. Castro, there was a dictator named Batista in Chile, in Cuba, right here. And Batista was a dictator, and the people rose up against him, led by Castro, and they threw out Batista. And Castro came to the United States and says, I need some help to rebuild my country. And President Eisenhower says, no, you need to put Batista back in charge. We know him. And Castro says, well, the heck with that. If you're not going to help me, where does he go? He goes to the Russians, the Soviet Union, the communists. And the communists said, sure, we'll give you all the money you need. And so he started taking money from the communists, and the Americans were like, hey, that's not cool. What are we doing that for? He said, well, it came to you first, you didn't help. So we said, we don't like that. And after Eisenhower stepped down as president, Kennedy took over. And just about a month later, we had what was called the Bay of Pigs invasion. And we had a bunch of people that supported Batista moved to Florida because they didn't like Castro. Well, we gave them a bunch of weapons, and they landed back on Cuba to try to take Cuba over again. But Castro defeated them, and all of a sudden, Castro was stronger than we expected. So we said, you know what, maybe we just need to have a whole big U.S. military invasion of Cuba to kick out Castro and put our people back in charge. But the communists said, you do that, and we're going to go to war. And they sent missiles all the way from here on ships, all the way to Cuba, missiles that had what inside? Hydrogen bombs. And we said, whoa, hold on a second, you have a missile here? It'll take you 5 minutes to get to Texas or Arkansas, 10 minutes to get here. It scared the heck out of us. So what do? Missiles are already here, more missiles are on their way. How are we going to get those missiles out? How do we defend ourselves from something that close? If you were president, what would you do? to attack. We actually tried to kill Castro a couple times. Yeah, so how would you get rid of those missiles in Cuba if you were president? Think about it. Tell me, what would y'all do? Yeah, what would you do?
Well, you could take some planes and fire missiles at the missiles and then throw them into the ocean.
If the missiles get launched, we don't have the ability to do that, and let's say you miss one. You have 10 million dead if the missile lands on America. So what would y'all do? If you were President Kennedy, what would you do? Guys back there, think, what would you do if you're president? It's hard, isn't it? If you attack Cuba, they'll shoot missiles at you. If you don't do anything, it could be even worse, yeah? And then what? You still have about 100 million Americans dead, I guess. There, that's okay. If you block the Russian ships, that could be considered an act of war and could start the missiles to fly. So what Kennedy did, and it took him a while to figure it out, he decided we're going to quarantine Cuba. Isn't that weird? What kind of word is that? Let's say in this school you have an outbreak of measles. It's very contagious. What the government would do is that they would quarantine the school. They put a bunch of people around it, wouldn't let anybody in or out. So that's what they said. Okay, we're going to quarantine Cuba. We're not going to let anybody in, let anybody out. We're not blockading it. It's all just different words they use. But in terms, they just blockaded this. We're not going to let any more in here. And then secretly, we told the Russians, Kennedy talked to the Russian leader, Khrushchev, and says, okay, we actually have missiles here in Turkey aimed at Russia. We told them, we'll get rid of our missiles here. Don't tell anybody. But we'll get rid of our missiles here. And then you get rid of the missiles that you have in Cuba. We worked a deal, yes.
Didn't he really not have missiles in Turkey?
No, we had a bunch of Atlas missiles. They were older, but they still had atomic warheads on them. Not as powerful as a hydrogen bomb, but we had about 86 Atlas missiles in Turkey. We were probably going to get rid of them anyway because they were old and we don't want them to fall in the hands of some other people in that area. Right there in Turkey. But it was the deal. The Russian leader can now go to his military leader and says, okay, we're getting rid of these missiles here that have pointed at us. And we pull missiles out of Cuba. You just have to work a deal. And that's the type of things when you become leaders, when you get older, is you got to work deals with people. You got to work a trade-off. You get rid of your bad stuff here, we get rid of our bad stuff here, and the world can survive. If we had attacked, there was already missiles in Cuba that we were not aware of. We thought they were on their way, but there were probably some there operational. And they later had CNN had some interviews with some of the Cuban military guys, and they said they're going to launch those missiles at America if our military had come across, or if our planes had come across to knock them out. That was scary. Now, how did the Cold War end? Poland. Let me see if I can go to a map up here. Okay, the Cold War ended. Poland right here. A lot of guys that work in the shipyards. It's a very industrialized country. And the guys in shipyards said, you know what, we're working too many hours, we're not being productive, we're not being as effective as we need to be. The owners of the factories are too mean to us. So the workers got together and formed a union. So when the owners started beating up on the workers get together and says, you know what, we're not going to work anymore. We're going to go home and nobody's going to make all the products in your factory. And you're going to get in trouble by the communist bosses because your factory's not producing anything. So all the workers would leave and they went on strike. Do y'all know what a strike is?
Yes.
Yeah, so exactly. So they went on strike. And all of a sudden those shipyards aren't producing anything. And the communist here says, hey, where's all the ships you promised? Poland says, guys are on strike. Other times you went on strike, they just bring in new people. But Poland, a guy by the name of Lech Walesa, organized a strike. And somehow they didn't throw him in jail. And Poland says, okay, all right, we'll let you have your union. You know, you can speak as one and work out your differences with the owners of the factories. And that was the first movement towards democracy in Poland. And then you had other countries, Czechoslovakia and Hungary. They said, you know what, we really want to side with the people. We're kind of tired of this hard communist rule, and it's too mean to the people, and we kind of want to have elections. And a man by the name of Gorbachev, let's go to Gorbachev. Yeah, good for you. Gorbachev became the leader of Russia. He was younger, and he also was saying, you know, it's a little about not fair. Communism is a little bit too rough. Those dictators are just too mean to the people. We're going to let people speak freely. And so Gorbachev said, okay, Czechoslovakia and Hungary, if you want to have some elections, that's cool with us. And they elected some people that were much nicer. And this right here is called the Iron Curtain. And that divides the democracies from communism. And it was barbed wire, it was walls, it was quite a bit of tanks and machine guns, and it was to keep. Okay, you had people trying to leave East Germany, they try to get across, they get machine guns. So you don't cross that border or you get shot. Well, Czechoslovakia and Hungary said, we don't like that border anymore, and they took it down. So what does all these people who want to be free, what do they do when this border goes down? Exactly, they all start running to Czechoslovakia and Hungary, and they said, okay, we're out of here, and they start leaving through here. And East Germany and Poland and Romania said, hey, Czechoslovakia and Hungary, how dare you do that? Put that wall back up. And they started, you know, having big arguments. And they went to Gorbachev. Gorbachev, you're the leader of the communists. Tell these guys to put the wall back up. And Gorbachev said, I'm not going to do it. They'll figure it out. And East Germany's having all these people leave. And East Germany says, hold on a second. Everyone's leaving here. How about if we just let one night, we're just going to let some people go through here in East Germany, and just go check out. We can let a couple of them go here, and then they can come back. Maybe about 100 of them. So they had an announcement. The spokesman for Erich Honecker, the dictator here in East Germany, and he said, okay, folks, we're going to let just a couple people leave. We're going to open up the gates to let some people go to West Germany. Because a lot of them had relatives over here. They hadn't seen for 40 years. But the mistake was, it was about 9 o'clock at night, and the East German guy was having a press conference telling everybody, we're going to open up the gates and to let some people go through. But he didn't have all the information. It was supposed to be the next day, and the East German military was going to be right there to just, okay, you can go, okay, just a couple of people, and then come right back. But that guy that had the press conference, he didn't know all that. All he knew was he could open the gates. And somebody said, well, when are you going to open up the gates? He goes, I guess now. What happened when he said that? Everybody in East Germany went to the gates and started pushing, hey, this guy just said we can leave. And the East German guards who've been told, if anybody tries to leave, you machine gun them. Now they've got 30,000 people trying to push through the gates. The guards are like, what do we do? We can't shoot all these people. And finally the gate broke. And they all just went right on through to West Germany. And West Germans on the other side were like, hey, welcome to the party. And they had a big party, and next thing you know it, they get sledgehammers, and they start knocking down the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain. They started hitting with sledgehammers. You can find all this on YouTube, all the videos. And these German guards are like, wait a minute, we're supposed to be shooting people who mess with the wall, and now you got 30, 40, 50,000 people with sledgehammers tearing it down. So the East German leadership are like, what's happening now? Democracy is now coming into East Germany. And we talked about Romania. Remember what happened to Ceausescu? The people rose up against him. All these countries that were communist all kicked out their communist leaders, and democracy is now in all these countries. Okay, now Gorbachev and the Soviet Union, where communism started. What happened there? He said, let's have elections too. Well, some of those people that have been in charge of communism in Russia for 60, 70 years, those guys have been making actually a lot of money, became very powerful in the communist world. They didn't like that, and they kidnapped Gorbachev. And they were going to take over Russia and bring it back to powerful communists, and they're going to send their tanks back into these areas to make them communist again. But this time the Russian people rose up, and they said, you know what, we've had enough communism too. And they kicked him out, and they became a democracy. So let's go back to the world. I'd actually only prepared for a half hour. Excuse me. So all these areas are now democracies now. So where in the world, right now, do you have countries that still say they are communist? Yes. Cuba's communist. What happened a couple of days ago as it pertains to Cuba?
Castra's no longer in charge.
Yeah, no, the older Castro, a couple of years ago, he was too old, and his actually older brother taken over. So the older Castro is taken over, but they still are considered communists, and they actually met with President Obama. It's the first time in 60 years that the leader of Cuba and the leader of America got together, and they shook hands and had a meeting, talking about opening up Cuba. So Cuba is communist. America's got the strongest economy in the world. Which country is the second strongest economy? China. China is considered still communist. You have more billionaires in China than you do anywhere else in the world. Yet it's communist. And it's not really communist. They're making more money. It's very much of it's weird because they don't vote their leadership in, but they're very capitalistic. So China right here has more people than any other country in the world. It's about 1.4 billion. What's the second most populous country in the world? India. That is 1.2 billion, and they're catching up very fast. India, more people live in this little area right here than in the rest of the world. Y'all know that? Almost. Japan, China, India, Indonesia, Philippines. More people live in this area right here than the rest of the world altogether. More people live in the Philippines than live in Germany. So we have democracies in India, all through the world, but you still have communism in Cuba, Laos, Vietnam, China, and North Korea, and that's it. From having half the world communist to just a few countries. And of those countries, some of the fastest growing economies in the world is Vietnam. I've been there many times. China.
Just look back at Beijing when they had the Olympics, all the production and all that kind of stuff
Oh, yeah.
that China was involved with.
China has a lot of money. China, they actually are looking for places to spend their money. The Chinese economy, they spend 6% of their budget on military. So they spend $100 billion a year on military. How much do we spend on military?
54%.
So France spends $39 billion on military. England spends $61 billion on military. I was on the Congressional Armed Services Committee, so I know these numbers. Russia spends $45 billion on military. China, North Korea spends less than $1 billion. Iran spends less than $1 billion. Let's get back, guys. China just went from spending $70 billion a year on military to $100 billion a year. Japan, $60 billion a year. So how much does America spend? $625 billion. We spend more on military than the rest of the world combined. We have a lot of navies. We have the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. You've heard of that, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. Each of those has their own commando unit. Each has their own depot system, medical system, supply system, academies. It's really 4 separate militaries, extremely powerful. But a lot of times, the United States is needed. When you had the tsunami in Japan, we helped them out. Indonesia, remember the big tsunami y'all seen on YouTube? The waves came in Indonesia. 400,000 people were killed. So our military was there quickly. Well, a lot of times there's military issues. In Yemen, we had our military there quickly. What questions do we have about the Cold War?
Could you just touch real quick, going back to the atomic bomb, on where we tested atomic bombs, maybe specifically Marshall Islands, since there's so many of the Marshall Islands kids in here right now?
So I think that's actually a picture.
Yeah, I thought that was the Marshall Islands.
Yeah, this is the Bikini Atoll, right next to the Marshall Islands. Who here knows anything about the Marshall Islands?
A lot of it.
Very cool. Yes, I was actually in the Marshall Islands. I was also in Samoa. I represented the tuna canneries in Samoa. I've been to Caroline Islands. Anybody been to the Caroline Islands? Was in Guam. Was in the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas Islands. Represented their textile facilities. And in Marshall Islands, we actually toured around Bikini. Isn't that a funny name, Bikini? That's name of the island.
It's like,
Yes, Bikini's a wild name, but actually they got the name of the bikini swimsuit after the islands, because some of the people on the islands were wearing outfits like that. So a lot of when they tested here, because you remember we did testing in New Mexico, the atomic bomb, and we've done testing in the ocean. France has done testing, England. A lot of these countries, China, Russia, they have the nuclear bomb. Because you go atomic bomb, hydrogen bomb, and the nuclear bomb. And we did a lot of testing out here because in the Pacific, there's fewer people. Yes?
What happens if they didn't bomb Hiroshima or Nagasaki?
If they didn't? Well, it depends on what they would have done in their place. I mean, if we told the Japanese we're going to drop an atomic bomb in the Bay of Tokyo, not on people but underwater, and had all the water evaporate real quick, I think I would have scared them just as well. But we just didn't know. We had a big powerful weapon, we wanted to use it, and we just really weren't thinking. Yes? Good question. Go online. Actually, I would recommend to study, become a nuclear engineer, go to MIT, and learn that way. Yes?
bikini is all filled with
A lot of it is. But it's much lesser degrees as what it was back then. I mean, you don't want to fish with there. Yes? No. No, that's, General MacArthur wanted to. Are you going to be at the Korea discussion? Yeah, if we discuss about Korea, we talk about that. Who here is going to be at the Korea discussion?
Anybody coming back later today?
You'll probably have a whole new group. Are you coming back?
Okay, a couple of them said they are.
Okay, so for the next 30 seconds, we're going to talk about Korea. Actually, for the next 4 minutes, since y'all aren't going to be here. Korea is fascinating. So the communists in North Korea attacked South Korea. And we had some soldiers there, but not many. And they pushed us all the way back to right here. And so we landed a bunch of soldiers here and kind of pushed them back. And then we landed, General MacArthur, our general, landed a bunch of guys here in Incheon. And the Koreans were like, oh my gosh, these guys are behind us, and then run back here so they wouldn't be encircled and captured. But we had better weapons, and we pushed them back and pushed them back and pushed them back. And next thing you know, MacArthur's pushed them all the way back here to the Yalu River. And we pushed them completely, pushed the North Korean military completely out of North Korea. But MacArthur said, you know what? China's communist. The capital of China is just right here. Why don't we just go right ahead and kick the Chinese communists out too? And the American President Truman says, hey, what are you going to do that for? That's going to start another world war. And MacArthur says, well, I don't care what you said, Mr. President. I think we should go ahead and attack and drop atomic bombs on China, on Beijing. What do you think the Chinese do when they hear that? They're going to say, well, to heck with you. And they attacked. The biggest single defeat in American military history. The Chinese attack, we thought it was a bunch of guys in pitchforks. They were better uniforms, better mechanized, organized. And when they attacked, they had a river they crossed, and they had all joined arms, and they all climbed across. Of course, some guys were drowning when that was happening. And they all come across, there's a bunch of barbed wire, and a bunch of Chinese guys threw themselves on the barbed wire so the guys could run over their backs to get across the barbed wire. I mean, they had 1 million guys attack us, and we didn't have no idea what hit us. We had a whole division wiped out in attack. So we take off running to come back here to set up a defense, and the Chinese are into it, and we go back and forth about 3 or 4 years until finally the war ended. And it was a tie. And neither one could push the other one off. But the Chinese got into the war. Okay, now about the Vietnam War. This person's name was Win Giap. According to the London Imperial War Academy in London, they have the 10 all-time greatest generals in the history of the world. Alexander the Great was on there, Napoleon, and then Giap was a Vietnamese general. It's in the top 10 of all time. He was still alive. So when I was in Washington, D.C. on the Armed Service Committee, I invited General Giap over to speak before the committee because he was one of the living all-time greatest generals. And everybody in the audience was all 2, 3-star generals, all taking notes on how we talked about warfare. General Giap is considered one of the greatest ever because in 1945, in Vietnam, he kicked out the Japanese. In 1954, France tried to come back in, and he kicked out the French. He defeated them. In the 60s, he fought America. All of those, the French, the Japanese, and the Americans, all had air superiority. They had more soldiers. When North Vietnam fought against South Vietnam in America, we had more soldiers than they did, but they still beat us. It was our first defeat because he did it. And then he attacked Cambodia to stop the Khmer Rouge and their concentration camps. So he defeated Cambodia, and at the exact same time, 500,000 Chinese attack him from the other side. And he flies all the way, there's no military, he lands in the capital city, he gets a bunch of teachers, women, accountants, anybody, finds weapons for them, and they stop the Chinese. In Korea, we couldn't stop the Chinese, but he did, with a bunch of doctors and podiatrists and animal doctors. So he is, and he's still alive. His military expertise is unequal to anybody that's living today. Anybody here for the Vietnam War discussion? All right, how much time do we have? Probably not much.